Recording in progress.
So welcome everyone to Psalms for Life, in which we explore the book of Psalms, Sefer Tehillim, with insights from Rebbe Nachman and the other true tzaddikim. And we want to thank Esther Alagurovich for sponsoring this shir. May it be a source of blessing to her and her family and to everyone who participates in this class. And I do hope you will stay on at the end for a recitation of the day's Tehillim. Now, today we are up to Psalm 15, which is a short one, but it is definitely a psalm that has a lot to teach us in this very, very short chapter. And Psalm 15 is a segula to be received well, thought of well by other people. And we all have times in our life where we may want to connect with other people, maybe in business, maybe personally, and we hope that they view us with the kindness and the seeking out of the nikuda tova, the good point, that we view them. It's very important to view them and to have us as well in this perspective. Okay, so this psalm is really actually fascinating. This psalm was according to Rabbi Simlai, of the Talmud, was the foundation of David HaMelech's extraction and explanation of the 613 mitzvot. This was that foundation in this short little psalm with only 5 verses. So what do these 5 verses contain? So the 5 verses contain 11 foundational mitzvot, which are going to bring us closer to Hashem. However, what we need to know is that David was addressing the people in his time as well as the people today. So these 11 principles deal with Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. Those are the mitzvahs between a person and his fellow. Okay, so these mitzvahs, these mitzvot, are all to do with how we get along with each other, which of course harkens back to the Segula. Now, what we have to know about this time for King David was his subjects were very weak in this area. The sages say the people of King David's generation, they were all righteous. They were all observing the Torah, but they would fall in battle. They would lose battles because they allowed lashon hara. They allowed talebearing to go on. And that tells you how important the mitzvah of shmiras halashon, guarding our speech, is. Now, King David composed this psalm. Yes, it's prophecy. Yes, it pertains to our days. Yes, it pertains to all times, but he also composed it for the people of his era to explain to them that the mitzvot between a person and his fellow is the path to dwell with Hashem. Now, the Rushami Talmud tells us that as a contrast, that the people in King Achav's generation, and we know that that generation was terribly wicked. There was a lot of idolatry and so on. But because they spoke well of one another, they supported each other, they didn't gossip behind each other's backs or attack each other, they entered battle and they suffered no casualties and won their wars. Okay, that's how much Hashem loves a person who loves his fellow Jew. It's such a powerful lesson for us. Now, I'm going to begin, and I'm going to actually refer directly to the Talmud here. So let me set that up. Okay. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi yagur ba'ohalecha mi yishkon bahar kodshecha. Okay, a song of David. Okay, a mizmor is a song, like a zemer. Okay. O Hashem, who may sojourn in your tent and who may dwell on your holy mountain? So we have two questions that King David is asking here. The first is, as Rav Hirsch says, who may sojourn in your tent? A sojourn is something temporary. It's somebody who wanders in and out and travels, a sojourner, okay? And then the next part says, and who may, and the word used is yishkon, dwell bahar kodshecha, on your holy mountain, okay? So who may walk through your tent and then come to dwell on your holy mountain, whether that mountain is Yerushalayim in this world, okay, Har Zion, Mount Zion, or whether it is the mountain of heaven, okay? In either case, the idea is who, the question David asks, who qualifies? Okay, so now he's going to begin to tell us. Okay. Holech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emes bilvavo. So he who walks in innocence and wholesomeness, I'm going to translate it that way, does the right thing and speaks the truth that is in his heart. So David is telling us here three different points. Okay, so the first point is that he who walks in innocence, tamim. What is tamim? So tamim implies innocence, simplicity, wholeheartedness. And this is a quality that Rebbe Nachman so greatly esteemed and wanted each of us to esteem, that he addressed this in a variety of ways in sort of a multimodal approach. And he encouraged us to talk about this with Hashem so that we were able to be one with Hashem and one with ourselves. We can read about what a tam is, what an ish tam is, a simple, pure, wholehearted person, in the Chacham and the Tam, the sophisticate and the simpleton, Rebbe Nachman's famous tale. We can also find it throughout his lessons. This quality is something that is actually quite rare. It's very rare for someone to express their wholeness at all times. It means not just in front of other people, not just in front of certain people, not just when one's home alone, not just when one is making hitbodedut, but all the time. To actually be self-actualized in this expression of wholeness, as the Freudians would say, the gestalt, the whole picture of everything. Okay, so let me go through this. Okay, so the Gemara, which I'm going to really, I want to quote the Talmud on this, says that the first part, he who walks as a tam, who walks in innocence, is referring to someone who conducts himself like Avraham Avinu, because Avraham walked before Hashem in wholeheartedness. So that's the first part. Okay. The next part of the sentence is someone who does the right thing, who does righteousness. Tzedek is the word used. We all know the word tzedek. It's related to tzaddik, a righteous person. It's related to tzedakah, which is distributing the money that Hashem gives us and other things that Hashem gives us in a righteous way to make sure that righteousness is done in the world. And this refers to, says the Talmud, a person such as Abba Hilkiyahu. Who was Abba Hilkiyahu? He was a worker, a laborer, and he's mentioned in the Talmud. Why? Because when he was on the clock, when he was working for an employer, he wouldn't even turn his head. He was a common laborer, even turn his head to greet someone, lest he should waste a moment of his employer's time, because his employer was paying him for his time and his labor. So this is a very ideal kind of approach to this concept, yet we can take it and say to ourselves, are we doing what's right in our lives? Are we doing with what's right? Are we walking with this kind of wholeheartedness? And are we sure to always be on the up and up? Okay, to make sure we are protecting the rights of everyone around us. Interestingly enough, when we are genuinely concerned with the rights of others, employers, and so on, and we really work to make sure that there is righteousness in our actions towards them, we find that we often benefit in return. We're also often treated the same way. Not always, but often. Okay, next. The person who speaks truth that's in his heart. Who does this refer to? So the Talmud tells us, Rav Simlai and the Talmud tells us in the Gemara, this is referring to one such as Rav Safra. And Rebbe Nachman references Rav Safra as well. Rav Safra was reciting the Shema when a person approached him in his shop and he wanted to buy whatever he was selling. And he kept in his mind to accept the man's offer. The man said, I'm going to pay you so much money for that thing. Okay, that item. And while he was saying Shema, he heard him and he said, I want to concentrate on my Shema. I'm going to accept whatever he offers, the first offer. And he didn't respond to him because he was davening. So the buyer misunderstood and misinterpreted Rav Safra's silence and concluded that Rav Safra really wanted a higher price. And so he raised his offer. When Rav Safra was done davening, he insisted on selling him the item for the very first sum that was offered. Okay, this is a level of truth we can all reach. It's not difficult. It really isn't. Okay, because if you're saying the Shema, which of course he was saying the Shema, he was expressing the unity and oneness of Hashem and his belief in this, then we know that whatever we get is from Hashem anyway. It's not that difficult. We don't have to scheme. We don't have to daven and then and have somebody bid us up higher and higher. Okay, so we are going to get in life what Hashem determines we should get. And yet we still have the obligation to work for our money and to not be fools about our money. Okay, yet if we have this faith, this emunah, and this bitachon, this trust in Hashem that Rav Safra did, then we will be fine with what we get. Okay, now the last part of that is the person who speaks truth in his heart. Okay. So that was Rav Safra. Okay, so the next part is the next verse, and I'm going to continue. Okay. Holech Tami Mufal Tzedek V'Tover Emes B'Levavo Lo Ragal Al Lashono Lo Asal Re'ehu Ra'a V'Cherpa Lo Nasa Al Karovo. So the next part is he who has no lashon hara on his tongue, no slander on his tongue, does no harm to his fellow, and casts no slur upon one close to him. Now, so interesting. Again, just thinking back to the beginning, this is all the instructions on how to dwell with Hashem. And yet every single instruction concerns our relationship with other people. You have to keep that in mind. That's how important it is. Okay, so a person who has no slander on his tongue refers to one, says the Talmud, as a person who conducts himself like Yaakov Avinu, our forefather Yaakov, who did not want to mislead his father in order to receive his blessings. Okay, he didn't want to go along initially with Rivka's plan in order just to receive his father's blessings, Yitzchak's blessings. But Rivka explained to him that this was a far greater issue than just receiving the blessings. It would affect all the tribes, all the Jewish people, and in fact, the entire world forever. So he agreed to do it because this was a bigger picture. But if she just asked him, for your own sake, do you want to do this? The answer would have been no. Okay. And so again, this idea is that someone would not want to lie to someone else, manipulate them in any way, and so on and so forth. Okay, next, does no harm to his neighbor, does no evil to his neighbor. Excuse me one second. And this refers to a person who didn't step on someone else's business or trade, which constitutes a legal competition. So what is a legal competition? So we live in America, most of us, or Israel, some of us. And so we know that competition is the lifeblood of business. Unfortunately, for those who believe that, that is not actually part of the Torah. The Torah gives us very specific details. The halachas are such that we can't compete with someone in a way to undermine their business. And there are many details about how this works. So for example, if you have two stores existing in the same general area, one store is supposed to sell slightly different items than another store so that they don't necessarily monopolize and compete on what in American business we'd say is an even playing field. People don't realize this, but this is actually a halacha. So I will give you an example. I have a friend, a lovely person who became my friend through shopping at her grocery store. And she opened the store in 1970 in Borough Park, and she's a block and a half away from me, which is how we became friends. And she was telling me the story that shortly after she opened the store, somebody else opened a grocery store immediately across the street from her. And she said, "Chaya Rivka, I was livid that that person would compete with me in this way. It's so against the Torah." And she went to her husband. She told me, crying, "How could they do that? I feel so wronged." Of course she felt wronged. Okay, "I feel so wronged. It's not right." Da, 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 da. And he said to her, "Trust in Hashem. If this competition is unfair, then that person will no longer be able to be here. If the competition is fair, according to halacha, then we have to assume that it's all coming from Hashem, and one of the two of us will be able to remain, or both of us will be able to remain." And he gave her a nice lecture. And she said she listened to him, even though it hurt her heart to listen to him. And within 2 months, the other person suddenly went out of business. Nobody knows why. And she said that she learned from that to not leap to a conclusion, number one, and to not feel that a human being could make the decision for Hashem about what would happen. I love that story. It really impressed upon me, first of all, that she admitted her vulnerability and her growth process to me. I found that, very endearing and very valuable lesson, and a very valuable lesson for all of us. Somebody does something, you don't like it, just remember they're not in charge. Hashem is. Okay. All right. We also should, of course, not do that to our fellow. Next, someone who doesn't cast a slur on someone who's close to him, someone who doesn't reproach or insult or harm or cut off or whatever, his relative. So what does this mean? This means that someone has to always be mindful that your relatives, your family are who Hashem gives you, and we should not distance them when they embarrass us. Okay. Now, in this period of time where everybody's relationships with everybody are so fraught, and this one's not speaking to that one, and that one's not speaking to this one, what does this have to do with us? So the first part comes with undoing the knot in our hearts when a relative, speaking specifically about family, immediate and extended family, does something to us or has done something to us that causes us anguish, that causes us grief. Okay. The idea is to put it in the perspective of this too is from Hashem, just like the grocery store is from Hashem. This too is from Hashem. This is the family that I am born into. For all of you who are interested in knowing more about why we're born into certain families, that's a whole other subject. I think that the special event Inside the Soul, which you can find on my YouTube channel, touches on this briefly. But this idea is that we have to begin with kindness at home. Where does kindness begin? Where does righteousness begin? In our own homes with our immediate families. And then we extend outwards. We can't put on a perfectly, fine face to strangers and not give our families the same kind of respect and love. And this is very important, okay? I mean, it's so important that this is one of the 11 foundational mitzvahs of Adam Bein L'Chavero that King David names in this psalm. Okay, next. Let me find my sheet with my big print. It's not so big today. I should have printed it out bigger. We are on verse 4. Neaves ve'enav, nimas ve'es yirei Hashem yechabed nishba lahara v'lo yamir. So this is he in whose eyes a vile person is repulsive, but who honors those who fear God, and who takes an oath to his own hurt and doesn't retract. So let's unpack that. So in whose eyes a vile person is despised. This refers to someone who conducts himself, says Rav Simlai in the Talmud, like King Hezekiah, who dragged the bones of his evil father, King Ahaz, in a bed of ropes because he despised those considered vile by God. Okay, so what does this mean? So the idea is that we are not allowed to embrace and love people who are vile in the eyes of God. What does that mean specifically? We can take a look at all the commandments, but the general idea is we shouldn't be kind to the cruel. It's very simple. And what determines who is cruel or who is vile and immoral? The Torah. And that's a whole other lecture. So it's something to keep in mind, like to not love people who are violent, disruptive. I mean, sometimes we have to show them love to help them, but that's different than praising them and holding them up as paragons of virtue. Okay, next. In whose eyes a vile person is repulsive, but who honors those who fear Hashem. So this refers to one, says the Talmud, who conducts himself like Yehoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, who, when he would see a Torah scholar, would rise from his throne and hug him and kiss him and call him my father, my teacher, my master, and so on. So this means we should honor those who have Yiras Shamayim, those people who cling to Hashem, who fear Hashem, who are living up to the other previous list in here as well. We should honor them and we should love them. we should treat them with great respect. And here, even the king of Israel would get up from his seat and hug and kiss a Torah scholar. It doesn't just refer to Torah scholars, although that's certainly on the list. Because when we treat a Torah scholar or someone who loves Hashem and serves Hashem, we treat them with honor and love, that's how we're treating Hashem, because they're Hashem's representatives on this earth. And a Torah scholar is walking with Hashem for sure. So this idea of honoring people who really honor God, and that's very important. Now, I'm going to touch on what Rebbe Nachman says in a minute. We're going to continue. So he who takes an oath that could hurt himself, he who takes an oath to his own detriment and changes it not. So what does the Talmud say? This is in accordance with the conduct of Rabbi Yohanan, as Rabbi Yohanan would say in the form of a vow when seeking to refrain from eating in another's home. I'll fast until I come to my house. And he would fulfill that vow and refrain from eating, even though he took the vow only to avoid eating in that place. So here's somebody who was in someone's home, and maybe they weren't kosher or whatever, and he didn't want to offend them. So he made a vow. He said, oh, I'm not eating until I get home. And he kept that vow no matter how long it took him to get home. Okay. So the first part is he was considerate of other people. He didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And the second part is he kept the vow even though it was to his detriment. So we must assume that that walk home was a long one and he was hungry and thirsty all the way home. Okay. So how many times do you make a promise? I shouldn't say you. How many times do we make a promise or imply a promise? Okay, we're not really supposed to make vows or promises. We should avoid that. We should say, God willing, we'll accomplish this. And we start of something and we don't finish. We let someone else down. It happens. We're human. The Torah is saying we can't let that happen. We have to be careful. Better to not make a vow in the first place, or better to make a promise that covers all eventualities. So if you say to someone, I'm going to come help you set up for your party. I know your party starts at 8. I'll be there at 7. You should say, no, I hope to be there by 7. I plan to be there at 7. God willing, I'll be there at 7. I'm going to do my best to help you. I'm really going to try my best to help you. And then we should follow through. But just in the off chance that you don't get there at 7 and something happens, you qualified yourself a little bit. That's how important it is to keep our promises, to avoid making promises. And if we do make a promise, we have to stick to it. We really have to stick to it. Okay, next. Don't toss off casual promises. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, next. Okay. Oh, this is very interesting too. Also, Rebbe Nachman actually says something. I want to actually bring it up here about that last one. When a person doesn't honor his promises, it also shows that he has no respect for people who honor God. Okay. And you can think about that, why those two ideas are so closely entwined. And also, the Rebbe really points out that there's a direct relationship between all this kind of honoring going on, honoring people, honoring Torah scholars, honoring those who love God, and just honoring everyday people and honoring our promises. All of this are parts of a whole. And the parts of the whole add up to the glory and honor of Hashem. When we keep our words, we are representing, we are doing the right thing, and we are honoring God. Okay, next. The last verse. Oh, good. We are pretty much on time. This one's kind of interesting too. Kaspo lo nasan beneshech v'shochad al naki lo lakach ose ela lo yamot leolam. So a person who did not give his money, who does not lend his money with interest, nor does he accept a bribe against the innocent? And whoever does these things is never going to falter. That's the last part. If you do all this, you're never going to falter. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So a person who doesn't lend his money with interest. Okay, hold on one second. So what does this mean? I'm sorry, I don't know why that's on. Okay, so what does this mean? It means we know it's a halacha. Of course, we can't lend our money with interest, but the halacha is specific. It says specifically a Jew can't lend another Jew money with interest. However, if we want to be really righteous, we do not lend money to anyone, Jew or non-Jew, with interest, even though it's technically permitted by Torah law. Righteousness carries through. Okay, so if you see someone suffering and you're able to lend them some money, don't charge them interest. Okay, we'll continue. Also, a person who doesn't take a bribe against the innocent. And the Talmud tells us this refers to a person such as Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yossi, who refused to sit in judgment in a case involving his sharecropper. Okay, so what is the story with the sharecropper? The sharecropper, okay, would bring him a basket of fruit all the time. And at one time, he brought him a basket of fruit before he was going to have a case heard in Rabbi Yishmael's court. Now, Rabbi Yishmael was so righteous, there was no way he was going to rule in that person's favor. And that person did not intend to mean it as a bribe. They were coming up to Jerusalem anyway, and they brought that basket of fruit a couple of days early. It wasn't even the same day or the day before. Yet still, these two righteous people were very, very careful. And Rabbi Yishmael said, I'm sorry, I cannot take your fruit in case I unconsciously favor you. Okay, in case I unconsciously favor you. Now, at the conclusion of the verses, it's written, he who performs these shall never falter. Or we could translate it as, he shall never be moved. He shall never be shaken from his foundation in life. Okay, so we could go through the Rebbe's lessons. We just touched on it a little bit, but we could go through Rebbe Nachman's lessons and the lessons of many other tzaddikim and find these wonderful insights into each of these 11 mitzvot that are between a person and her sisters. Okay, so anyway, I hope that you enjoyed that particular psalm. It's short and sweet. Before we begin the day's recitation of Tehillim, I do want to tell you that next week we are on Psalm chapter 16, and that is the first chapter in Tikkun HaKlali. So we will have a little bit of a special emphasis next week. I'm excited to share it with you. And today is the 8th day of Adar Aleph, the first Aleph. And hold on one second. I'm going to pause this so that we don't have to have this on the YouTube video. Okay.